after the tumultuous events of 1916, so well commemorated last year, to overlook this period, 1917 and 1918. But on the political front, Sinn Féin, under the leadership of Arthur Griffith, was having extraordinary political success. On the activist front, the general amnesty meant that all those who'd been interned for their part in 1916 were back on this island. But it was to Sinn Féin, Arthur Griffith's Sinn Féin, that everyone turned. Thomas Ashe, who was the president of the Supreme Council of the IRB, he was canvassing for Sinn Féin and for the Sinn Féin by-elections when he made that speech, which was said to be seditious. It took place in Ballinolea in County Longford. He was arrested this month 100 years ago, and of course it was the inhuman treatment he received in his death.
On behalf of our society, I want to welcome you all here to Glasnevin Cemetery this afternoon to join with us to commemorate the deaths of these two great Irish men, these two great Irish patriots, General Michael Collins and President Arthur Griffith. They died within a couple of short weeks of each other in August 1922. This is also the 95th consecutive commemoration ceremony held to remember their deaths. We're very proud of that fact, that these ceremonies have continued uninterrupted for those 95 years. And just to say, for the benefit of those of you who may not be familiar with Eamon Duggan, maybe you haven't been here, Eamon Duggan was a co-signatory to the treaty, along with Arthur Griffith and Michael Collins.
In an manahar sa vekag sa spirit neva med. Shade of a weary to lawn the gross to ton tirna lat to spanny who wid of an og sa spanny he third of Reniasa. Shade of a weary to lawn the gross to ton tirna lat to spanny who wid of an og sa spanny he third of Reniasa. Shade of a weary to lawn the gross to ton tirna lat to spanny who wid of an og sa spanny he third of Reniasa. Shade of a weary to lawn the gross to ton tirna lat to spanny who wid of an og sa spanny he third of Reniasa.
Today, we particularly remember the Kilkenny City by-election, which took place 100 years ago this month, and which saw the election of W.T. Cosgrave, a great hero of the Collins Griffith tradition, and later to be the first head of government of an independent Ireland. In his victory speech from a window of the Victoria Hotel, W.T. Cosgrave addressed a jubilant crowd, and let me repeat some of what he had to say. I again take this opportunity to thank you on my own behalf and on behalf of my friends for the signal honour you have conferred on me today. I have to thank the Sinn Féin committee, which has put me up as their candidate, the Cumann Amon, who participated in many of the demonstrations we had in the city, the volunteers of Kilkenny, the members of the corporation who supported my candidature, those who sent motor cars from all parts of Ireland, and the electors, some of whom came hundreds of miles to record their votes for a free and independent Ireland. I thank you on behalf of the many families that were bereaved in Ireland 15 or 16 months ago, because your answer at the polls was to them a message of thanks and a message that their sacrifices were not in vain. We are determined to drive any party out of Irish life which subjects itself to English influence in Ireland. In the name of the men and women who fought and died for Ireland, I thank you for having recorded your approval of the sacrifice that they made. Let me conclude by saying two more things. One, that the 1917 by-elections represented critical stepping stones between the 1916 Rising and the 1918 elections, which led to the First Dáil. It is only right that we remember these momentous by-elections, these stepping stones on the path to Irish freedom. Secondly, as we leave the grave of Arthur Griffith today, it is most appropriate to recall that in his excellent book on Arthur Griffith, Owen McGee remarks that W.T. Cosgrave believed that Griffith, in all his efforts, was actuated primarily by a steady realism and a tremendous work ethic. Through these qualities, he had led his movement to the eve of success, not least by convincing the Irish public that Irish nationalist goals were truly worthy of support and could actually be achieved. This was done by, simultaneously, earning the personal respect of almost all sections of Irish public opinion, by showing that, in his relationship to the Irish polity, he was both a noble and devoted servant and a true citizen. Upon this basis, Cosgrave judged, with regard to Griffith, that his achievements, that an autonomous Irish state, remains his best monument. Thank you.
We're delighted to see such a large crowd here today. But it's also important to remember that for 95 years this event has been an important event for the families of General Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith. And it has been important for all of those years that we've had the support and the attendance of members of the Collins and Griffith families, and also the families of Kevin O'Higgins and W.T. Cosgrave and many other heroes of the Collins Griffith tradition.
where talán de gras de tá tír na leat is banni huid vanag sa Spania third vriniasa. Shed vaha where talán de gras de tá tír na leat is banni huid vanag sa Spania third vriniasa.
This year, to mark the 90th anniversary of his death, the Collins Griffith Society wishes to remember Kevin O'Higgins, Vice President of the Executive Council and Minister for Justice. Kevin O'Higgins was an ardent Republican, although he famously described his colleagues and himself as probably the most conservative-minded revolutionaries that ever put through a successful revolution. Despite his strident Republican views, Kevin O'Higgins supported the treaty negotiated by Collins and Griffith. In a speech in 1922, he declared, "I have not abandoned any political aspirations to which I have given expression in the past, but in the existing circumstances, advise the people to trust in evolution rather than revolution for their attainment." Following the adoption of the treaty, Kevin O'Higgins played a pivotal role in the Civil War. It was O'Higgins who conjured up the memorable image of himself and his colleagues during the Civil War as simply 8 young men in City Hall standing amidst the ruins of one administration with the foundations of another not yet laid, and with wild men screaming through the keyholes. Kevin O'Higgins went on to a key role in the establishment of the Irish state, the founding of An Garda Síochána, establishing our courts and our systems of criminal justice, and facing down mutinies. Like Collins, Kevin O'Higgins was a pragmatist with a deep sense of public service. He believed that the lives of people should not be sacrificed to the dictates of doctrine. He declared that the welfare and happiness of the men and women and little children of this nation must, after all, take precedence over political creeds and theories. Kevin O'Higgins was assassinated 90 years ago on the 10th of July, 1927, aged only 35. In the words of William Butler Yeats to O'Higgins's widow in the immediate aftermath of the assassination, "The country has lost the man it needed, the great builder of a nation." For Emmet.
And on behalf of the Collins Griffith Commemoration Society, I'd like to invite you, Stephen, to deliver this year's annual oration.
Well, the importance and significance of Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith in this country's history is well known. They came from different traditions in the independence movement. Griffith sought independence through non-violence and the establishment of a parliament in Dublin as an alternative to Westminster. He broke with the tradition of the Irish Party, which sought independence through political action at Westminster, but he still saw politics as the way to independence by setting up a parliament in Dublin. Collins came from the uncompromising Fenian Republican tradition, which saw violence as a legitimate way to achieve independence so that the Irish people could decide their own future. And Eamon Duggan, the other founding father of the state commemorated today, is far less well known than either Collins or Griffith, but he was one of the signatories of the Anglo-Irish Treaty and played an important role in ensuring that the entire delegation signed that treaty. He was also a minister in the first decade of the Free State's existence. In my view, the great achievement of Griffith, Collins and Duggan too was that despite their differing approach to the winning of independence, they all took responsibility for finding the best political solution available to them when they signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty in December 1922. Each of them struggled with the enormous burden that had been placed on their shoulders, but when it came to the crunch, they took responsibility for making the decision they believed was in the best interest of the Irish people, knowing full well they would be disowned by many of their own supporters and people who had no interest in compromise. When they returned home, they had to defend that decision in the face of enormous pressure, both physical and moral. But they had the courage to do what was required to lay the foundations of an independent Irish state, which has survived as a parliamentary democracy for almost a century. But they both paid for it with their lives. Griffith died from exhaustion and a broken heart in early August 1922 at the age of just 51. Not unlike the Irish party leader John Redmond, who died 4 years earlier, having worked tirelessly for Irish independence. Only 10 days after Griffith's death, Collins died in a more brutal fashion, and one that he appears to have envisaged when he signed the treaty less than a year before. With both of them dead in August 1922, there were well-founded fears that the new state would be stillborn. Hardline Irish Republicans and elements of the British establishment were united in their desire to see the new state fail. But fail it did not, and that is in large measure thanks to the unsung hero of Irish independence, W.T. Cosgrave. He may not have had the commanding presence of Griffith or the romantic revolutionary charisma of Collins, but he led the state through its first difficult decade and established the primacy of parliamentary democracy over revolutionary violence. On the day he was elected President of the Executive Council by the Dáil, a few weeks after Collins and Griffith had died, Cosgrave spelled out his philosophy clearly and succinctly. He said, and I quote, "It is my intention to implement the treaty as sanctioned by the vote of the Dáil and the electorate, to enact a constitution to assert the authority and supremacy of Parliament, to support and assist the National Army in asserting the people's rights." I think those principles have been followed by every successive government since we achieved independence. And Cosgrave managed to achieve that not just by seeing the Civil War through to its conclusion and ensuring that the first democratic election in the state's history really took place in 1923, but in laying the foundations for all of the institutions that have served the state ever since. It is worth repeating again, because it's not often appreciated by many Irish people, that the Irish state is now one of the oldest continuous democracies in the world. Almost all of the other new states established in the wake of the First World War to succumb to dictatorship of either the fascist or communist variety, but this state did not. And for that I think credit is due to a range of people and movements. I think the unrelenting campaign of John Redmond and the Irish Party had by the summer of 1914 forced the British government to agree to establish a parliament in Dublin. That achievement paved the way for the final push to independence in the years that followed. I think also at this, it may not be the place to do it, but at this Collins Griffith Commemoration, we need to acknowledge the contribution made to modern Ireland by Eamon Duggan and Fianna Fáil, because 1932 was every bit as pivotal for the survival of Irish democracy as 1922. The leader and his party, who had fought a civil war against the forces of the state in 1922-23, won power through the ballot box in 1932. And there were real fears that either the Cumann Gael government would refuse to hand over power, or that the newly elected Fianna Fáil government would take power and abolish democracy. In the event, neither happened. And for that, both parties and their leaders deserve credit for ensuring that power was handed over peacefully to those elected by the people, thus honouring the commitment made by W.T. Cosgrave in 1923 and 22 that the people would decide who their government was going to be. And it is worth remembering that in the 1930s, many of the democratic states in Europe fell under the sway of dictators one after the other. That wasn't just the case in Germany and Italy, but Spain, Austria, Poland, Romania, and many other countries fell to dictatorship. But Irish democracy had put down such strong roots that it was able to withstand the coming to power of a party that had been on the losing side in a civil war only 10 years earlier. Their courage is the reason we enjoy the freedom we have today. Thank you.